All right, let's get started. 7 o'clock session here at Keystone Sessions. I always think when we have community members that bring ideas forward, how I think I would call it inspiring, but it's not. That's not the word I'm looking for. Motivational it is for me because I've known Clint now for a while through other work that we've done with Social Venture Meetup, and the familiar with what he's doing with his organization. But when he brought this idea to me, it was like, oh, of course, we should be talking about this. This is a much more expansive topic than what any one organization is doing here in Kansas City. So you put together an amazing panel to have a conversation around music education and the I think more holistic, more comprehensive impact. So I am terrible at introductions. I always feel like I'm going to mess them up somehow. So if we could just go down, maybe introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your organization, and we'll start from there.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm Kyla Pitts-Zevin. I'm the executive director at the Northeast Community Center, and that is home of Harmony Project KC. So if you're familiar with the historic Northeast, you know how beautiful and wonderful and vibrant it is. The Northeast Community Center was founded 80 years ago by Italian immigrants because that was the Italian neighborhood at the time. And the community center served all kinds of needs. It provided English classes, citizenship classes. They had pasta dinners on Sundays, music classes, everything that the community needed. And so the community center's work continues today. It's just who those immigrants are looks different than those who originally were with us in the 1940s. But you definitely still hear some of those same threads and those same themes of what those families are experiencing. So children and families come to us for Harmony Project KC. It's an intensive after-school and weekend orchestra program, 5 hours a week, from when a kid is 7 years old to when they're 18 years old. We also have our Path to College program that provides college guidance counseling because the whole mission of our organization is to help reduce barriers to get into college. So if we have the next member of the Kansas City Symphony, that's wonderful, but that's not actually our goal. Our goal is to use everything we know about music's impact on the brain to improve educational outcomes for our children. And then because we have close relationships with our families, from knowing them for the kids' entire childhood, we have our care services program to provide support for things like utilities, food distributions, English classes. That's our most requested resource. So that's just a little bit about the Northeast Community Center.
Awesome. My name is Clint Velazquez. I am the founder and executive director of Bass Academy of Music. I started BAM a little over 12 years ago when I was teaching music lessons in the suburbs, living in the city, and started just looking around and asking, where do kids learn how to start to play an instrument? That was foundational for me as part of my journey through school. I didn't really care about the classes, but the music was the thing that made me feel alive. Around that same time, a student of mine came to me and he told me that, he's like, hey, my mom passed away and you're the first person I wanted to tell. And that just really hit me of just the impact that a music teacher has. Those were always my favorite teachers. And then for me to be that in a student's life just kind of had a profound impact on me. And so through meeting with families, through a lot of exploration, I found a Bass Academy of Music, and we do one-on-one music lessons. We do them on a sliding scale so that any student, any family can afford to give their students that quality music education, that one-on-one relationship where they have a person in their life who's saying, I see you, I hear you, you matter, you can do something amazing. And then through the medium of music, we just work with students for whenever they start with us, as early as 6, and we would like to work with them all the way to their 18. We currently, just this last week, we taught 187 lessons, which is the most lessons that we've ever taught. Majority of our students are qualified for federal free and reduced lunch, and we have 2 locations, and we're looking to just continue to offer that high impact one-on-one training that music does, both the mentor relationship, the social emotional learning, the executive function, just all of the ways that music really can impact a young person and help them succeed in school, succeed and beyond. That's what we want to see our students do.
Well, these are my friends who do amazing things. And my name's Enrique Chi. I'm first and foremost an artist and a musician. And a decade ago, my band was had just gotten back from some DIY touring, which means we got into a crappy old van and booked ourselves wherever the world would let us play. And we came back and realized that in our city, just like Clint realized, there was a void, especially for communities of color, for immigrant families, to experience music. Harmony Project was not happening in the Northeast neighborhood at that time. But we started a 1-week music camp. And as it evolved and we kept iterating, there's a beauty to not having any nonprofit structure or any big vision. We just wanted to do something great because we kept tweaking it to be what would be the most useful. And what has emerged is something that's called the Rebel Song Academy. Well, it's a nonprofit organization called Art as Mentorship, where I moonlight as the executive director of a growing organization. And our flagship program is called the Rebel Song Academy, that connects the real empowerment of why you make music, the creative process, seeing a project from start to finish, which has a bunch of transferable skills, entrepreneurial skills. But in that journey where we were pivoting based on what families needed and what the kids were asking for, we realized that the most important thing we could do is connect music making to what I believe is its fundamental purpose in the human spirit, which is it's a way to create wellness. It's a way to have a vehicle for the journey inward, and to create a, modern man would describe it, better mental health or mental wellness. But I feel that it's a part of the human experience to use music as a vehicle to heal from trauma and to come through these places. So we wrote this curriculum with art therapy in mind, and again, working kind of as a little island independently of the traditional nonprofit sector. We started getting knocks on the door from schools saying, would you bring this in? And so that journey has continued. Now we're preparing to scale that program into 10 different schools, and we're working with teenage hospice centers, alternative schools, folks who need it the most. And next year, after running the program in 10 different schools, we get to sit down with all the thought leaders that helped us get to this place, folks like you all, and assess, is this the first 10 of hundreds of schools? Or, what is the future of this organization? That is coupled with my musical life. I play in a band called Making Movies, and we are not the philanthropic social stuff and the rock and roll band, the Latino rock and roll band, collide in a project called Americana, which is a movement for us. It's just part of a national conversation, redefining American music to include the full broad narrative and reconnecting it to wellness. That, if the blues is the foundation for all things that we describe as American music, well, the blues was also a vehicle for wellness, and maybe a clumsy one at times, but that was its place. And so there's a bunch of different ways. We have a festival coming up in 10 days in Concourse Park for free. We celebrate Americana. We also are working on a PBS documentary series. We had a pilot PBS episode air locally, and we're working to make 4 episodes that will air nationally on the subject. So kind of wear 3 hats: rock and roll, social activist, social entrepreneur, and being the steward, at least for the time being, of a scaling education program that's working both in school and after school.
My question for all of you, so as we talk, as years ago, I would have thought of music education in the simplest form of you're teaching people to play music, right? And it might be for college, profession, whatever it might be. Listening to all 3 of you, it's so much more than that. Was that the intentionality that you had when you went into this, or as you started to teach music, you started to understand those extra elements of what it was providing to kids? How did that journey happen for all 3 of you to understand, was it lived experience that it was bigger than that for you? It sounds like may have been the case for you, but for, the other 2, like, was it that same thing? Like it was already there, or you developed it as you went along?
I'll jump in on that one. I never knew a world where I wasn't playing music and that didn't bring me joy. I think that the transition from like my reality to realizing that other kids needed that, I had that realization when teaching, when talking about anyone else with music, of the thousands of conversations I've had with people of saying, "Oh, you're a music teacher. I wish I still played music." I've only met one person who was, not sad that they quit. So it's like, I know that music is something that is like just foundational to who we are as people. Be teaching music and doing the research on just what happens into your brain, onto your executive function growth, what happens with that social emotional learning piece. That's something that I've learned and grown, but it's things that it's like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. This reaches this. I think one of my biggest desires always as a teacher is to democratize music making. Is a way to think about it. We see people up on a stage and we're like, oh my gosh, they're so amazing, they're so fantastic. And it's like, no, you are capable of doing those amazing things. We are all capable of being great musicians. You have that you have that innate skill in yourself. And so I want to see more people being music makers, because more music makers means more people are more creative. People are more creative, then our world becomes a beautiful place. So
Kyla?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I don't come to this as a musician. I come to this as someone who had the very good fortune of living in Mexico for 3 years when I was a child. And the warmth and the community and the hospitality and the friendships that I experienced as a child were incredibly, incredibly special to me. My parents had to drag me back kicking and screaming. And my goal has always been to do anything I can to return that warmth and hospitality to immigrant families who are here. So it really is just, it's what I received and I want to give it back. From an arts perspective, I think theater and dance made me into the hard worker that I am today and the collaborator that I am today. I'm just a nonprofit geek that gets to hang out with rock stars. So like, that's very cool. But no, the Harmony Project KC has been at the Northeast Community Center for 8 years now. And I always knew the impact that the arts could have holistically. But I think one of the things that has shocked and delighted me the most is our music therapy program, because we launched it just a couple years ago after we'd had music going on for a long time. And I was like, I don't know, man, I'm excited, but families are going to be like, what the heck is music therapy? What are y'all trying to do over there? I don't know what that is. And I could not have been more wrong. And of course I couldn't have been more wrong, because they were literally seeing how music was transforming their children day to day. And so the wait list for music therapy is out the door. It's so long. So the families are seeing it too. Like, we see it and the families see it. And for me, yes, I get involved because it's about that very special community of people that I get to be a part of.
So for me, it was definitely a journey, and I was resistant to starting a nonprofit. We had this beautiful music camp, and our band would book a show often at Knuckleheads. We would, like, because it's the closest venue to the Northeast, and we would have the kids perform. It was a 1-week program. We transitioned to making the program about songwriting just as a need basis. Our band at that time had started to get some buzz nationally, so we'd done like an NPR Tiny Desk concert, and so folks locally would talk about on media about, like, hey, this band that's doing this cool stuff also has a music camp. So you'd have kids walking up by abandoned, boarded up houses to the community center, the Matty Road Center. And you also have some other folks who were bringing their kids in from the suburbs with the fancy guitar and the little amp and the thing. And so it's like, how do we make this camp fun for this diverse group of human beings, of teenagers? And we realized that songwriting was just a way to level the playing field. So it was like a survival skill, because we were a bunch of knuckleheads trying to get through a music camp and then have the kids show up at Knuckleheads and perform and all that. But at the end of those weeks, we've had a couple families go up to us and say, hey, this was transformative for our young person. So I finally said, you know what, let's try to grow this thing and spread it out into like a semester-long program. And we try to unpack why it's transformative. And I was playing outside this venue in Minneapolis called First Ave, which is a famous venue, Prince, everybody's played there. And this guy who's kind of like a regular there, he showed up and he's like, oh, I'm here to see your band. We were eating lunch. We had just loaded in. And like, oh, very cool. He kind of sat down, started talking to us, and he's like, yeah, I deal with addiction recovery, and I'm a recovering addict, and I use music as one of the ways that I do this. And he's like, you know what it is? There's two types of dopamine, endogenous and exogenous dopamine. And so as a drug addict, exogenous is coming from, and I might have messed up those words, I'm not a scientist, but the dopamine that comes from an external source, which can be wonderful. I'm drinking a beer, it's giving me a little dopamine. The sugar hit and the alcohol is activating my brain. When you do exogenous dopamine, sugar rush, drugs, alcohol, there's a lot of different ways to do it. It's your body's producing the dopamine because of an external source, and your dopamine creating centers of the brain start to weaken their ability to create dopamine. But when you create dopamine through an internal mechanism, music making, exercise, meditation, your body actually strengthens its ability to make dopamine. So you create the rut. If you're just getting the dopamine from external forces, the biggest culprit today's society is social media. We have AI supercomputers preying on children's brains for a profit of corporate America and corporate, globe, at the expense of teenage mental health. And we've allowed that to happen. We've lost our first battle with AI. And that's because there's just exogenous dopamine going bing, 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 bing in a young person's brain. And it's weakening and cheapening their ability to make it for themselves. I didn't learn any of this except for being in the trenches with young people who were going through some of these crises. And now we worked with an art therapist to write the curriculum in a way that has these vulnerability touch points where it's peer-to-peer vulnerability, because you're writing a song. You have to say, well, what are you making your song about and why make a song? The program, the Rebel Song Academy, can be pretty much wrapped up in saying, why do anything? Let's sit down and figure that out first before we make anything. And then also, now you have a creative idea. Let's put adults around you who believe in it, and let's get that idea to the finish line so you can have that intrinsic value of like, I made a thing, regardless of where you're at. Like the bumpers in the bowling alley, they'll come up if needed. Some young people don't need it, but they'll come up and need it. We'll get a young person to the finish line. And it's been transformative. And so this last year I knew, arts funding is difficult, and being a rock and roller with dreadlocks, walking into foundation offices is not as it's not as great of a business plan as one might think. But we knew that there is a lane to get more funding to expose this work. And so a friend of mine's been doing doing neurofeedback therapy, and he had the tools to do EEG scans. So we came up with what we called a punk rock research project. So we asked 5 families with the same spirit as we started that first music camp, like, hey, you got the stuff, you got a PA system, guitars, Clint, you have an electronic drum set, bring it up to the camp. Clint helped us with our early camps. And so we've known each other for a decade of this stuff.
It was fun.
It was fun. It continues to be fun. And he brought in this equipment. 5 families opted in, signed the waivers, and we scanned 5 young people's brains before the program and after the program, and connecting like factors for depression, anxiety to the anecdotal evidence. And of course, it's not like something that can be published in Scientific American, but we're going to make art of it so that we can share this narrative. And I know that one of the young people was having the social emotional part of the brain function 3 standard deviations from the norm. And at the end of the program, it was functioning back to normal, which in and of itself maybe doesn't, you could scientifically poke a hole into that is just like, oh, that doesn't connect. But what I know is that the mother of this young person came up to me at the final show and broke down into tears and said, I think the act of making this song was the turning point for my young person.
And who knows better than a mother? I mean, like, who knows better than a parent, like what the turning point for their child probably was.
That's right. So then the brains and the anecdote connect. And so it's been a total learning experience for me, but it's helped validate why I make music too. And that's been maybe the most beautiful part of this journey, is learning all this stuff and being able to share it.
Kyla, I want to come to you about on something that you said earlier, but before I do, I want to follow up on something you said, the dopamine factory, story, that thread that you've kind of been following. Was the first time you talked about kind of bootstrapping an experience, the camp, kind of, like doing it for the kids, doing it for, the music. Was the first time you'd heard that parallel when you sat down in Minneapolis and had someone like explain it back to you that way? And then was that where that fascination started for you about the impact on the brain and some of those things? Or was that a validation moment? Like, what was that?
So all of the above a little bit. I had been curious. But that relationship with this man, we ended up keeping in touch, and he would send me things to read and articles. And, I would understand half the article he'd send me and then try to make sense.
And research the rest of it, or try to.
Yeah, exactly. And that just kind of opened up a doorway. And now we have a committee forming around the nonprofit called the Whole Artist Task Force. It's mental health leaders that help us kind of go deeper into these things. And music therapy is a beautiful thing. And this is not to discount that at all, but in the last meeting that we had, one of the music therapists goes, in a way, we're part of the problem, the therapy side of things, So don't change that these are young 20-year-old artists who are teaching these programs, because the second you put on those words, therapy, clinical, etc., labeling things, you can close doors on accident.
Yeah,
And this is a
stigma.
music
Yeah.
therapist saying, so take that with a grain of salt. She's committed her whole life to this because she believes in it too. But just say that is our role, is to be a bridge. And there's a beauty in the fact that we're not clinical, but we're informed by the clinical data and the realities of how this works.
So on the data piece and on the impact that it has, you had mentioned something about it, the impact that music education has on the way students learn in other areas. Talk to me a little bit about that, like what you see, or what that research has said, or kind of where you go with that.
Right. So Dr. Nina Kraus is a very prominent researcher on music's impact in the brain. She's at Northwestern. And we are the 5th affiliate of Harmony Project out in LA. And there was a study done on those Harmony Project students, and it just found that they, as musicians, they hear better through noise, is one of the things that I find actually most interesting. And so when it comes to classroom environments or different things, they hear better through noise, as well as have stronger literacy and numeracy skills. Now, one thing for me coming from the nonprofit geek who loves spreadsheets, here's what I'll tell you, because I have to have some. I don't have a guitar with me, but I do have spreadsheets that I could show you. Our students have higher school attendance rates than their counterparts. So our average school attendance rate for our students is 95%. And if you look at average daily attendance at KCPS, it's about 83%. The local high school in the Northeast graduation rate is 70% at Northeast High School. We just had 8 seniors graduate. 6 of them are first opportunity college students, and 6 of them have full rides to school. And if you look at all 8 of them collectively and you add up their tuition dollars, 95% of their tuition dollars are paid for. So this is tremendous. And if you look at, so we do daytime programming with KCPS. And so we were able to actually look at the kids that participated and look at their attendance and look at their standardized test scores. And guess what? The kids who participated had higher standardized test scores because of everything the research shows.
Clint, you talk about mentorship and the executive function piece of what you do.
Yeah, I think one of the books early on when I was teaching that like informed a lot of what we do is actually called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And he just was like, why are there areas in the world where lots of talented people come from this area? Why do so many soccer players come from this one favela in Brazil, or baseball players from the Dominican Republic? And so through that, he just is like, there's a way that you can learn that you actually learn faster. He calls it deep practice. You actually learn skill by building myelin along your neural pathways that lets the signals go faster. And so it goes from like, when developed, you can send signals 100 times faster through your brain. And so just like teaching kids how to build that skill set, it's you want to instill like self-confidence in a kid. The easiest way to instill self-confidence is actually have them do something that is demonstratively better, that they can be like, oh wow, I'm good. It's hard to argue with that with themselves when that happens. The other piece that we see is master coaching is what he would say is like each one of these places had someone there who was just kind of what he called the talent whisperer, could walk up to a kid and be like, lift your elbows and then home runs, or deeper breath and more air, and the high notes came out. And so amongst us and our teachers, we're like, hey, we want to be that community. We want to be that area where each one of our teachers is committed to the skill set of being a master teacher. And that means that taking the time to be like, when you're working with a kid, actually take the time to know what is important to that kid. Say like, hey, what matters to you? What gets you excited? Because I can teach you how to be a successful musician no matter what style or song or whatever you're bringing to me. I can teach you how to be a successful musician doing that. And I think it matters more. In fact, we know it matters more when it's an intrinsic motivation. But then the final piece that we rely on is actually ignition. Why are you interested in doing this? It's a great question that actually should lead the reasoning for everything that we do. Is like, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to become a better musician? And when you're getting that time with a kid and working with them one-on-one, they're constantly getting that feedback from an adult, from someone who's older than them, that says you can do something amazing. But when you put them in proximity with other kids, then they're seeing, and it's possible for you to do it too. And so you constantly want to put those things in kids that says, oh wow, I saw them do that, and that was really cool. I can do that. And when you have kids who are constantly pinging off of each other, with that kind of support that you're bringing in from a mentor, someone is saying like, yes, you can do this amazing, and I am studying and dedicating my life to helping you do it better and faster and better and faster, and bringing in the best techniques and the best ways possible to actually create those results that are tangible for the kid. You're just creating an environment where you are seeing kids go from like, can't do anything to like, oh crap, did you hear that kid play that? Like so many of our students that have played, so many of the kids that have come from Enrique's program, I've heard like several students from Harmony Project. It's like there's a moment where they kind of just like get over the top of the roller coaster, and you're just like, damn, that kid is good. And the other kids notice and they start following. Yeah. So it's the mentorship piece. But the mentorship doesn't happen alone. It happens in the community. And you really have to engage every member of the community, from the parent to the teacher to the other students, to make that really work.
Yeah, so let's pull on that thread for a minute, because community development, all three of you have touched on the element of community and how important it is. So talk to me a little bit about what music education has done in the respective communities that you serve. Maybe not even for the kids specifically, their students, but for the larger community, and what the impact these programs has been.
Okay, I will take the first stab at that here.
Never sit next to the moderator.
I know.
It's always gonna.
No, this is the best. This is my favorite question. So when I listen to our parents and what our parents have to say, they say, I didn't know my neighbors before. I didn't know the people on my street, but now our kids get together and our kids play music. And that's beautiful. That's so, so beautiful. And then those cross-cultural connections. We had a songwriting course over the summer, and there was a student whose family had immigrated from Mexico, and then a family who was a refugee family from Iraq. And this young gentleman from Iraq shared his experience, and watching them connect over, again, it's those same themes that come across immigrant stories. I just put on my "We Are All Immigrant" stickers that I bought at your show. I just put it on my laptop. But anyway, that's the beauty. Like, I could spit statistics for days because I love it. But having a parent say, when my daughter plays the cello in my home, it's like a dream. I sometimes cry. I feel like I'm in a movie. Like, that's beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the beautiful part of the community building that you described, it feels to me, so my mother was a community organizer in South Chicago, and for me, the impact of community, referenced it as beautiful. The importance of it, though, the practical importance of having a community where you know your neighbors, the accountability, the safety, the responsibility to a community now is so much deeper when you know the people next to you and the people across the street, the people down here. So it's important. We've lost that thread in society, and so it's interesting to hear you talk about that's part of what it does.
And I think, like, on that thread, something that I noticed with, attempts to work on help supporting Kansas City and supporting youth and supporting the struggling school system has inadvertently fractured the school system, where kids can live at 87th Street, go to school at 18th Street, go to the after-school club at 36th, and they're never actually near their neighbors. They're never actually in school with their neighbors or doing any programming with their neighbors. Something that's really interesting is that a way to build connection and friendship with people is spending on scheduled time together. If you just are with somebody on a regular basis, you're going to form a deep connection. It doesn't matter your religious, political, ethnic, socioeconomic stripes. Like, you just build relationships with people. And so we actually intentionally do that in our waiting rooms. It's like, hey, there's 8 families who are coming in together at the same time for a music lesson. And so just every week for half an hour, they're spending half an hour together, and we're getting this community built together. And we see, like, one of our newest staff members, Amani's back there, and like, he told me, he's like, Clint, you kept talking about, this community that you built in the waiting room. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But then we had a mom come in who was just like, hey, her son had recently had a bacterial infection in his brain and was in the hospital, scary situation. And she came into the waiting room and was just like, hey, he's doing so much better and this is going on. And I just, and he's like, parents got up and gave her hugs and there was all this stuff going on. And Amani looked at me, he's like, okay, you're serious. And that's the kind of, like, those intentional points of, like, nothing's going on, intentional points of, like, in music, we call it a rest. It's a time to make space to let something happen. And when you create those intentional moments in community on a regular basis, you build those relationships. And then so when you have a recital where, we have all of our students coming together, one grandma's gets like, and like everyone is cheering because it's like, yes, I sit with her every week and that's your kid. She was so good. And you get those kinds of moments. And so you foster and you build, something around something beautiful like music, like your children playing music together.
We get so focused on the things that separate us and the things that divide us instead of the things that bring us together. So that's powerful. Absolutely. Enrique.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different perspective, affirming everything you all saying, but taking a more kind of like macro look at the music community at large. And our band, we made an album. We were frustrated. We made an album called Americana. We misspelled the word Americana the way that you would pronounce it in Spanish. And we had just gotten, in that time, without getting political, the national rhetoric was turning more divisive than we had seen. I think we all know what time we're just referring to. And just saying the word out loud, I'm an immigrant, and I wrote this story about my family, who immigrant family, like the Venezuelan cousins who immigrated to Panama and the things that they were dealing with. That's what the story is about. That was politicized instantly. All of a sudden, every interview I was doing is this activist band with this immigrant story. That it's like, that's just my family's story. I didn't know what is political about it. Something humans have done since the dawn of man, to migrate around the world. So we're like, you know what, Americana, because Americana music should represent all of us. We were opening a tour with Hooray for the Riff Raff. She was taking us to wonderful venues, like we played the Fillmore in San Francisco and a bunch of places. This venue in Oklahoma is like, we can't have this opening band. We don't do that kind of music here. What kind of music? You don't do guitars and drums and bass? I'm pretty sure you do. Oh, because there's congas and my name's Enrique and some of the songs are in Spanish. You don't do that kind of music? Okay. And that's where that movement Americana came in, based off that album. And the deeper I get into the stories, the more I see the connections between all these cultures. For example, you land in New Orleans, which is like the tip, the northernmost most point of the Caribbean is what most people call it, right? Because every merchant ship that entered the Caribbean for the last 400 years, 500 years, would have to enter in and they do a loop. And one of the loops was Bocas del Toro, Panama. They go through Cuba, through Veracruz, Mexico, New Orleans, and then pop out. So there's this just cross-pollination, this soup of amazing cultural diversity just happening in the Caribbean, as well as tragedy because of slavery and a myriad of other things. New Orleans is the home of jazz, the birthplace. You enter the airport, and it's Louis Armstrong, mural on the wall, and connecting that to Kansas City. When New Orleans had an economic downturn, we got an exodus of musicians here, and that's why jazz grew up in Kansas City, though it was born in New Orleans. I didn't know until very recently that Louis Armstrong's musical director was a black man, but was a Panamanian immigrant who moved out of he was playing at church with his dad, and he said, "Mom, Dad, I'm leaving to go play some jazz music in New Orleans," and he became Louis Armstrong's musical director. So when we think of these American music stories, they're just intertwined, and salsa music, most people think it's a Cuban thing, or is it? No, salsa music is New York City. And, the one of the most famous musicians in it is just a Jewish guy. He's like, it's like there was this cross-pollination of human beings. That's what is really amazing and complex about this country. But that's what we're trying to celebrate. So the festival celebrates that. And I think that it's important to use music as that lens to remind each other how connected we all are.
So the community aspect, we talked about the impact on the kids in a variety of ways. Enrique, you said something earlier about walking into a foundation as a musician, dreads. I don't think it matters when you walk into a foundation, is my opinion. I've learned from talking to so many different people that I think they see us all the same, even though, they don't give any of us money, but it's fine. Economic. So listening to you talk, I feel like we mistitled this segment. It should have been music education. It's really about science and spreadsheets. Because I've learned more about, the way the mind works and dopamine production and some of those types of things. There's this interesting thing that's happened with arts in schools. And I say interesting, not in like that, oh, how fun and fascinating interesting, but it seems to be one of the first programs that got the plug pulled as schools started to pull back on finances and on, state budgets were going down across the country. Arts education was the first thing to get thrown out. This mindset around economic development, this mindset around the larger impact that music has on a school, a community, a city, whether it's tourism or other things. Talk to me a little bit about that. Has this been something that musicians have been forced to do because of this? You have to explain it in different terms now in order to get funding, in order to get in schools and get students and those types of things. Is this always been the case and it's just now others are now starting to understand and see these things? Help me understand that a little bit, and then I want to dive deeper into the economic impacts part of that as well.
I think it is a dance of how to translate something that is it's within us. Like we're part of a national cohort that is doing 18 cities doing activation next year about connecting arts and municipalities and health, funded by the World Health Organization. And though it's new and exciting, and I like being in those meetings with all the new language and the new data and new research, to me there's something kind of funny to it. And not funny, haha, but peculiar maybe. Of like, wait, don't humans know this? We know this. Like now we need to be like, we have to have all these new validation language. So sometimes I do think it's a form of code switching, just to get something that's intrinsically good through the hoops that it needs to go through. And perhaps because we've built a society where profitability is the god of our culture, when things can't be so clearly defined by profit and loss statements, although I know you love them, and I have grown to an affinity to understanding things like that, but when it's can't be so clearly defined in that way, I think your job as maybe a culture bearer is to translate it however it needs to preserve a beautiful thing that we already know.
I think something that's always interesting to me is like we talk about like the profitability, this like bowing down to capitalism in America. And I think that we have to like acknowledge that it's a short-sighted bowing down. Like if companies were honest, then investing in their employees, both in like healthcare, parental leave, all of those types of things would be like first and foremost on their list, because if they want the best productivity out of the people that work for them, you take care of your people. And you do that as a long-term strategy because that's going to be more profitable for your company, but people can't look past a quarterly statement. Like same ways you look into music education into the schools. If schools were actually honest about their test scores, about their attendance, about their student engagement, about the success of their students, the last thing that they would cut would be the music, and the first thing that they would cut would be the football team. Because that's where you're going to see the investment have a long-term impact. But that is where, again, we just see this talk of financial investment, but really a short-sightedness onto shiny new things. And so like that's kind of what I see over and over again as being like, hey, the things that really make an impact in the long run, whether that be in the music room practicing really slowly with a metronome, or in the long run taking some time to invest into the women in your workplace by creating like non-discrimination policies and following up with sexual harassment, and those types of things. Those things would make a long-term investment to both a better company culture, both a better world. We don't do them because in the short time they're not pretty, they're not sexy, they might temporarily hurt your bottom line, or they're hard, and so we just pass over things that actually would make an impact.
It seems like, when you say short term, it also seems like it's a myopic focus on one thing. We love to talk about focus and how people need to focus. But we lose sight of, sure, if you're good in math, you can be an engineer, and engineers make a lot of money. But you could be a better engineer, a more successful engineer, if you have this more holistic approach to how you were educated and how the critical thinking skills that you were acquired, and some of those other. We've lost sight of. No, it's the whole thing. It's not just as one thing that we need to focus on. Sorry.
I wanted to follow up on what you said and kind of connect with something Enrique said earlier, which is I think focus is important, and to me that's what your vision and your mission is all about. But our organization is doing a big study on Adrienne Marie Brown's work on emergent strategy. And we've done this big study on Tema Okun's work on white supremacy characteristics in the workplace. And we're working with this fabulous consultant named Boulong Ramiz. And she was helping us through, and she said, a lot of workplaces are working on, like, what are we striking out? Like, what do we not want to have? But we also need to be focusing on what skills are we building, what ways of being and doing are we building. And for her, that's Emergent Strategy, this work by Adrienne Marie Brown. So everybody look it up. But it talks about part of being emergent is being adaptive. If we look at nature's incredibly adaptive to survive. And I think about how you described the early iterations of Rebel Song Academy. It was incredibly emergent, incredibly adaptive. So you have that mission and that vision of what the purpose is, but you allow yourself to be emergent to meet the needs of the people that you're with.
Let's talk about the macroeconomic piece. So as we came out of, it's like it was this clear line, and we all know it wasn't, but as we came out of the pandemic and we were talking about economic recovery, and we were talking about small business, and we were talking about which sectors got hit the worst and so on, it was really clear to a lot of us that were at the table, the artists were just decimated in terms of their ability to make it through. It's the business model, it's the connectivity, like you lost the human connection, and that's what so much of that was about. As we're talking about the recovery, though, on a macro basis, a regional economy or a city economy, talk to me a little bit about the impact that music, whether it's tourism and some of the other things, talk to me a little bit about what that means to Kansas City to have such a strong art community and such a strong creative community as an underpinning to an economic climate that is successful, that is vibrant, if you will.
So I was playing with numbers recently because I'm not a spreadsheet nerd, but although I'll admit they're fun. You can have a lot of fun with spreadsheets.
Spreadsheets can be art too.
They absolutely can be. I was like just researching, and I was just, like the NFL draft had recently come through, and the city just released their grand numbers of $146 million is what the economic impact of the NFL draft was. Like, and they're just like, oh, it's 60 million more than we thought it was going to be, and yay. And I was like, I just kind of Googled, and I was like, the Taylor Swift economic impact to the U.S. economy is going to be $5 billion, which is equivalent to the NFL's impact of the U.S. economy. So T Swift by herself is already like matching the NFL, and they expect Beyonce to do better. And so like those two powerful women are going to just take out all 32 NFL teams. And we talk about like economic impact of, and like,
You're picking a tough battle in the city. You're fighting football.
I'm fighting.
Yeah, but you got T Swift on your side, so I think you're going to win that.
I got Queen Bee on my side, man.
Yeah.
Every guy on the.
I'm just saying you're brave. You're very brave.
I'm brave. and I'm not saying like we need to have one or the other, but I think that we just need to put music in its place and say, like, when we're talking about like that economic impact, Taylor Swift had 152 concerts. That means like in Kansas City alone, there's average about a $46 million impact of her coming to this city. Just like her doing that. When you talk to the performers, they really enjoyed the NFL draft because there was all these after parties, and like, the industry side got to really enjoy that. But like the shop owners, like you talk to shop owner after shop owner, the NFL draft was like a loss for them. People didn't come in, they didn't go out. Like they're like, this was horrible. They said Taylor Swift, yeah, Swifties were in their stores buying the stuff up. So fun. It was so much better. They could actually see the profit that came from it. I like sports. I'm a Chiefs fan. I went to K-State. So, I enjoy the sports, all the sports ball. That's a fun thing for me. I get it. I think that my favorite thing about music is like nobody loses when you have a concert in music. Everybody just leaves happy and excited and feeling good if it's a good concert. Like September 10th, if you come to Concourse Park, you're going to feel good. You're going to leave feeling great. There's going to be amazing vendors around. Like there's no disappointment. There's nothing like from that. And so I think that we need to just remember like both there's a huge economic there's an economic upside to supporting both a national music scene and also a local music scene. I think Kansas City has the capacity to support artists like making movies, and like there are hundreds of amazing artists here in Kansas City that we have the capacity to support, and we have the capacity to be the music capital of the United States. And I hope that with what we're doing in our organization, that is a byproduct of what happens. That's not our focus. That's not what we're trying to do, but we think it's a byproduct of something that can very well happen if we raise a generation that appreciates music, that they actually go out and see music, that they support live music. The music scene can be both something that is producing at a level that brings the money into Kansas City, and also changes the culture in Kansas City where they come out and they support that kind of local music with real dollars and real cents. Because we know we already make an impact on the economy. It's just whether we acknowledge it.
I think I saw a stat at one point in time. So I'll take on a team we don't have, hockey and basketball, rather than taking on the Chiefs. We can take on the Royals. It's an easy fight though. We're going to have to edit that one out too, Zeke. The idea that, not having a basketball team, not having a hockey team, because we have the T-Mobile Center, will always be the Sprint Center in my mind. That's the second, I think, next to the Staples Center, that's the second number of concerts in a venue that size in the United States every year. Like they're constant, because they don't have a sports team, they don't have to book against those dates. They're constantly bringing acts in and bringing that money into our economy. And I think there was a study that talked about the impact of having that number of concerts at the T-Mobile Center versus having a sports team there. The impact was much greater because of the number of people that were coming. Like if you had season ticket holders and a mediocre team versus the number of people that are coming in multiple nights, more per year. I'll have to go find it somewhere, but it was talking about the economic impact that not having a team have, and having that be focused on concerts and events was having on the community. I thought it was fascinating. So I think it speaks to maybe a more macro opportunity than, maybe T Swift and Beyonce seem, they say that's an unfair fight. They're a little bit, they're anomalies a little bit, right? You can speak more to that.
Well, I think that there's a couple of two different like directions that I want to take. The first one is just thinking about our organization's livelihood and ability to sustain its impact. And what I want to do with this punk rock research project is also connect it to a little economic study of the impact of not doing this. What is the impact of not exposing a young person to all the resources that they may have for their mental health? Not exposing them to a peer group of supportive other creative folks, especially if they're an justice impacted youth or someone who is failing out of traditional schools, so they're at one of the alternative schools we service, or a homeless center. Like, what is the impact of those folks not knowing there's a whole world of options and opportunity for wellness that maybe it doesn't fit inside of a traditional clinical form, and create that impact, and then show that, kind of like you're saying, it's like nearsighted, like yeah, this might be expensive, but this is actually really, really affordable antidote for a lifelong addiction issue or a lifelong depression issue or et cetera. So that's one side of it. But the other side, I think that where Kansas City specifically has a lot of room to grow. We actually have created some of the most incredible musicians in the history of mankind. And I'm not just talking about Charlie Parker. I just had a interview and a songwriting session with Brian Kennedy, who wrote a handful of Rihanna's hits, has written for The Weeknd, for Luke Bryan. He's a Paseo Academy graduate. Dom Sanders, my friend, who also a UMKC graduate, who just produced on Hozier's new record, played bass on Janelle Monáe's one of her tracks, is working on tons of records of the best records in the world, like hit number one. Hozier's record hit number one last week. These folks are from Kansas City, but they don't live and work here, not anymore. And they admit it's a tough place to come back to. There's some cultural reasons. I feel that the effectiveness of the redlining in this city has left a psychological imprint where things are siloed off and other people's success is your failure. And there's like this weird culture in the arts and kind of even the nonprofit sector. We are exceptional for various reasons. But I meant the word more technically, that we are an exception in the nonprofit sector. We are technically in competition of each other. We go after the same funders for funding, but we're working collaboratively. This is unique. The nonprofit sector is not like this all the time. And there's those elements. Neither is the art scene, neither is the music scene. But there's also not infrastructure. So I remember that the first time, like none of my team lives here. My booking agent's New York City, managers Atlanta, management like media assistant Memphis. A lot of out of town folks come in for the festival.
Is that what you mean by infrastructure? Like the people, the things that surround the industry that enable it? So
that's right.
Okay.
My music video director, LA, recording studios I make records in, not here. And so there's not this infrastructure, and I see it in the kids, right? So like you can only dream as big as you believe. So we just brought on a new intern, and she was helping a band out, and she's like, I think I want to go into like marketing and business and stuff. But she had been managing a little band, and I was like, did you know that's like a thing you could do? You could make a hell of a living, like if you really just hone in on these skills. She's like, really? I'm like, all right, you came in for intern to the nonprofit. You're gonna come to our management team meeting on Monday. And like after the meeting, she's like, I don't know if I understood everything that was happening, but this is interesting. You know, it's like there's people that do this for a living, and that's news. Early before the first music camp, a young man, he said he wanted to be a record producer, and he needed to write his dream job, a rap producer, for an essay. And the teacher has said, well, you can't put professional athlete or astronaut on your essay. And I was like, I don't know if I buy that, but I get what you're saying. It's like, put recording engineer. You're going to start working with local acts, and eventually you hope to produce Jay-Z or Kendrick Lamar, whoever what your dream artist is. He goes, I don't know. I don't know if she'll believe me. That's a real job. I was like, do you believe me? That's a real job? So the first music camp, I brought my friend. He's like, this is my friend. His name's Mike. He's a recording engineer.
Tell him what you do.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like that infrastructure. We could develop that here, and perhaps foundations, if you're listening, if you Kauffman Foundation, with all your entrepreneurial interests, there's a huge void, and it's not a talent void. It's a void of infrastructure around the talent to cultivate an industry.
When we first started this project, one of the reasons we chose this location was its proximity to creative class and to culture and to research and to business. It's in this donut hole of all of these things. And one of the things, as we went through the community engagement work early on, the aspects of the music community and the history and the legacy of Kansas City's music scene kind of stood up. But then the one thing we kept hearing was the lack of business acumen, the lack of that. I think you describe it as infrastructure. And that's why we see artists and producers and all these people who flee for a variety of reasons. Some of them aren't related specifically to the industry that you point out, but many of them are, because if they want to be successful in those other roles, they're not here. If they want to be successful as a producer or as an engineer or as they have to go somewhere else to be successful in those things, and they're not here. And that's so unfortunate, because there is such a strong music history in this city. We're talking about ways that we can maybe address that through entrepreneurial programs similar to what we've done with Social Venture Studios. So it's fascinating to hear you describe it that way. Before we leave, any last thoughts about kind of what you do, music, anything that you've not shared with us yet that you want to make sure that you share with us around music education, kind of what you do, or where you see the future of this for Kansas City, what you'd like to see the future of this for Kansas City would be.
I'll be selfish for my own hope for the three of us. And Enrique kind of previewed it a little bit of that we are really working together and really trying to work together. And we all, I mean, you can tell just from the way that we speak, like we're different people. We have different talents. We have different abilities. And our programs are unique. And what we don't want is to lose any of that special sauce that each of us have. But we're really looking at, wow, how could we come together to be the best we can be for kids in the city who, like I literally just emailed Jack in your office because my husband teaches and he has a kid and he's like, you know what? My kid would be great in that artist mentorship program. He knows I'm the executive director at Harmony Project, but he's like, that kid needs to go over there. So it's about that collaboration. And so my selfish but team oriented thing that I want people to know is that we're trying to do this thing together and we need support to do that because that takes a lot of time to kind of figure out how could we be better together. There's a lot of infrastructure in a different way to figuring that out. So that's what I would say.
I mean, yeah, support us first and foremost. I remember actually, continuing on from this story of like I was having a conversation with a kid and his dad, and the dad was telling the kid that he could never make a living actually being a musician. And I was like, okay, and you owe me $150 for these music lessons.
Yeah.
And the dad
as he's handing you a check.
as he's handing me a
explaining that you
check,
can't
and I was
make
like, you literally realize you're supporting me as a musician. There's actually a guitar pedal manufacturing company located just outside of Kansas City, and the guy that runs that, one of the things that I love about him is he geeks out on guitar pedals, and he geeks out on everybody's guitar pedals. It doesn't matter where they're from, who made them, like those are, his competitors. And he's just sitting here just talking about like, hey dude, this guy made this just amazing, fuzz pedal. This delay is so great. And it's like, you make guitar pedals for a living. And I think I've heard you talk about your guitar pedals once out of every 20. I love that mentality from him. I love this idea that like, us succeeding individually means that we all get to succeed. That like the kids that are coming into BAM that are learning kind of like what we call shedding in the music, like you go to the practice room and you just spend hours and hours getting better. Like those kids can come in with this vocabulary and they're like, oh my gosh, I want to write songs. Or they come out and they're like, hey, I want to play in the orchestra. And then there's places for those kids to land that, that we have a lot of cross-pollination that, what I want to see is kind of more of this, but more of the community at large being like, hey, music really does make an impact in a young person's life in deep, profound ways. And like, we need to support that work, and we need to really make sure that the young people who are coming up are supported so that way we have the kind of music community and the kind of community at large that we all keep talking about we want to see.
I have an affirmation of this and a slightly different perspective to add. I agree. I think there's a collective voice that we can raise, and this all boats rise. But I brought a prop, and I feel remiss not to use it, so I'm gonna bring out this prop. This little guitar is called a very attitude. It's all right. I'm not really gonna play a song. I mean, I guess maybe I could, but this guitar is a Panamanian. It's a Panamanian instrument. It's I think of the word autóctono is the word in Spanish. What is something when something's like truly folkloric from a place in English? What's that word? Oh, maybe we don't have a word in English for that. But it's like it's original to Panama. The story is that Spaniards brought guitars to Latin America, And the Spanish guitar is an evolution of the Middle Eastern oud. So it's this thing that's taken a long journey before it gets 500 years ago to Central America. But they were enslaving black folks and enslaving indigenous folks, or conquering them. And so indigenous folks weren't allowed to play their guitars. So what they would do, indigenous folks looked at the guitar, liked it, and using technology they were more familiar with, they would carve out these little instruments that's just one piece of wood. Normally guitar, these are either separate pieces of wood that are braced and glued together, and the neck's a different piece of wood. And so then this indigenous instrument that's imitating a guitar is born and becomes kind of a historic instrument for the country. I'll play it. And so music teaches us to be resilient. And then those strumming patterns were played atop of African, African influence, African cultured drums. And that music, many people, has evolved into things that people call as cumbia and stuff like that. In Panama, it's called típico music, as in to say typical music. Like, this is our folkloric music. So from the genesis of Latin music, it's this marriage of the guitar and the African drum. It's a marriage of indigenous communities that were underrepresented and enslaved, and black communities that were underrepresented and enslaved. And they maybe found commonality amongst each other and said, hey, this stuff's hard, but you know what we can do? We can play the pain away, and we can have a good time together. And so in this nation that now has so many immigrants from Latin America and is going through, re-looking at its racial history and redefining it, it's also a moment for black and brown folks to unite with amazing allies from other communities, from white folks too. It's not just us, but black and brown folks to unite and to build a stronger link, because our history and our music is a threaded, united story. And sometimes I feel like we were taught on purpose it isn't, because it's easier to control people who don't see each other as all part of one story. And so I feel that the future Kansas City, can we unite these stories and just look at a broader musical history as a part of the beauty that makes us American?
Let's focus on those things that bring us together. Thank you, man. That's great. Thank you all for spending time with us, sharing your stories, sharing the programs that you're working on. It's amazing work. And, I think I speak for a lot of people. We appreciate the dedication to our community, to our city that you guys all have.